Okay, thank you, Nick, thanks, Emma, thanks everybody who organized this and these wonderful 2 days and a half. I want to start with a quote. To those who are awake, there is one world in common, but of those who are asleep, each is withdrawn to a private world of his own. That's Heraclitus, a pre-Socratic philosopher. And what he says is partially true nowadays, because a century later, psychoanalysis show us that all the daytime life of the subject, memories, hopes, fantasies, fears, converge in the dream world as well. And so the diurnal world, what we experience during the day, and the nocturnal world interface. That's why I fell asleep and I was dreaming and, before getting here. So we are never alone. Even loneliness is a social relationship. And that is an important thing to bring home when we think about reconstructing, remaking our own fucked up world, to use the same terms. And to be awake in that sense means to be aware of our relations while co-creating the world. So what I want to do today is to start from the largest possible setting of our relations. The idea of social cooperations, and from there see what the commons have to do with social transformation. When we generally talk about the commons, it's very useful to start from situated cases, which are very important. But when we are dealing with the task of with the problems of transforming the world, we are actually talking about the problem of the interconnections between these various situated realities. So we have to kind of scale up our own thinking to try to approach things in a more general sense without, though, abandoning our eyes, our attention to the smallest and the more situated cases. So I'm starting from social cooperation. And social cooperations, really, if you look around the room, anything here being produced, anything that we see materially, but also the immaterial things, so to say, that we embody in our bodies, our way to understand the world, even how our emotions are constructed socially, they all come from some circuits of social cooperation. So we need to talk about social cooperation, and I would like to start from social cooperation as a whole, which, as a tentative definition here, I want to define as the whole of human activities and social relations reproducing society as a whole in the metabolic exchange with non-human nature. Whenever I talk about nature, even if I say non-human, I really imply non-human nature, because we are also nature. Let's not forget about it. So, we are taking even the broader picture, and from this broader context, I like to draw this little picture, which helped me to kind of map out the different distinctions. So, if we take this circle here as let's say the largest systems we are embedded in, which is the ecosystem, okay, as a more broader systemic exchanges, relations that happens outside, but within which we are embedded. We then have a lower embedded circle that we called societal cooperation. No, sorry, not societal cooperation. Let's use another term which I will explain later. Let's say societal reproduction. Okay, so the reproduction of the entire society, whatever you can imagine. Today we're talking about in a global sense. Okay, societal reproduction. However, our own humanities is recreated within relation with the ecosystem. Well, inside the societal reproduction, how we reproduce as a whole, our own entire world, there are two other forms of reproduction which I think we should focus on whenever we're thinking about the problems of the world. And this is what we call capital reproduction and social reproduction. Okay? This relation between societal reproduction and ecosystem defines what is generally called social metabolism. Okay? It's been talked by Marx and other people. We're not going to talk about that very much, but social metabolism is our social interchange with the ecosystem. Okay, and we know how this social metabolism has quite a few problems given climate change and environmental destruction, etc. So this is just a way to map out the overall problematic. Okay. The overall problematic is that the societal reproduction, which has an effect on the form and intensities of social metabolism with nature, is actually made up itself of two other types of reproduction, and that capital reproduction and social reproduction. Capital reproduction is the reproduction of systems which are based on capitalist rationality, essentially the pursuit of profit for profit's sake. This capital reproduction has an inherent boundless drive. As we know, capital is about accumulation, is about growing, is about extending every sphere of life, and we saw it that in this period, this has reached very deep critical points. Well, social reproduction, I'm using this now. I'm going to talk about a little bit later, more in details. I just put it as a working definition, and then I will explain later. Has to do with the reproduction of human beings by means of human beings. I use this general definition and clarify later. Reproduction of human beings by means of human beings, social reproduction. Capital reproduction is about the reproduction of capital. And of course they are intersecting. Capitalist reproduction is pervading more and more spheres of social reproduction. Think about education, think about health, think about how a lot of spheres of social reproduction are colonized by the rationalities and practices of capital. And the big problem of our times, not just today, but has been accumulating to the point in which it is a critical point, is that these two rationalities have reached a big clash. Okay? Have reached a point of being extremely incompatible. It's not governable anymore. Their own somehow congruence in any way. It wasn't before, but with the climate crisis, this has reached terminal point. Okay, and these two logic and rationalities and practices have clashing purposes. Are defined by clashing modes of productions, way of doing things, and especially something that summarizes it's clashing measure of things, something that I'm going to talk about a little bit, clashing measure of things. Okay, so we got these two forms of reproduction which are fundamentally clashing. Now, when we're talking about social cooperation as a whole in this way, we also, to borrow a term but in a different context from Hart and Negri, we should recognize that social cooperation as a whole, and still at this level, is a mixed constitution, is made of different forms of social cooperation. It's not just capital, no, it's a mixed constitution in different ways. The commons that we've been talking about are part of this general social cooperation. But what we call capitalism generally define the fact that the capital mode way of doing things, of measuring things, etc., has an hegemonic power in relation to other modes of doing things and modes of production. So social cooperation as a whole is a mixed constitution, which means that capital hegemonize, dominate, has power over others in terms of resources, in terms of many other things. And we know that this clash, this big clash between these two reproduction has been creating and accelerating a series of problems. I mean, just look at the report, a yearly report of Oxfam, and you see how the income and wealth hierarchies in the world also widen, and you know, those statistics where a bunch of a few people have 60% of billionaires have 60% of wealth, of global wealth, or it is expressed in climate statistics, and that Nick would every now and then it shows on Facebook in a very depressing way, but unfortunately we need to know all that. So well, I know it's important. It's important to remind ourselves all that, but. But I want here I will not here speak of all the details of those horror statistics, but the horror statistics are there as an expression of this clash. Also, what we see in this clash, what is expressed in this clash, is also a growing. And this is happening in the last 20 years at least. This is other set of statistics and data that show us that, in fact, at the global level, that's where we are, struggles are increasing, and there's been an argument, statistical argument at least, that, for example, various forms of catastrophes, of problems, social and environmental problems, fuel struggles. So if one looks only at struggles and look at the statistics, we have an amazing growth at the global level of struggles everywhere. Okay? Again, as a result of this big clash. But that's just to say, I don't want to go into the details there. I want to then focus one second on the word reproduction as applied in different contexts, for capital and social reproduction. First of all, what is reproduction? What do we mean by reproduction in general? Okay, not one or the other. I just quote Marx here, which I think gives us a general idea of what we talk about, is whatever the form of the process of production in a society, it must be a continuous process, must continue to go periodically through the same phases. A society can no more cease to produce than it can cease to consume. When viewed, therefore, as a connected whole, and as flowing on with incessant renewal, every social process of production is at the same time a process of reproduction. So a process of reproduction creates the conditions from which production in general is laid on. So the Oxford Dictionary calls reproduction as producing anew. So production is a process that starts from conditions, from A to B, and ends with a result. While reproduction is a process in which as a result is turned into a condition. It is the creation of conditions. Okay, so reproduction brings us a circularity. Okay, in which production is linear, reproduction is circular, and it allows the process of production to continue. Okay, now one way to create the conditions of production is to reproduce the components necessary for systems of production, as well as the fundamental relationship among components. And here goes to an idea that I just mentioned, and is the question of autopoiesis. No, so we have on one, so this circularity we should keep in mind. Okay, the products that become conditions, or what is produced that become conditions for a new cycle. And when we are talking about changing social cooperation, is to kind of change precisely the finalities and priorities of this cycle. Right, to break the cycle, to give it new horizons, to give it new conditions, and to create new set of relationships within which the new emerge. Very briefly, I already mentioned, let's talk about now specifically the difference between capital reproduction and social reproduction. So capital reproduction, capital is a social system which has a purpose, which is boundless pursuit of growth, accumulation of capital, and corresponding stratified relations of wealth and command, and this endless growth, endless accumulation is based on separation or alienation, individualization between us. Right, it's a focus on individuals rather than relationship, exploitation, and cooptation of anything that can be used by capital to reproduce the thing. Okay, so that's the basic thing. Through this system, this spiraling system, we are reproducing extractions, inequality, waste, pollution. We reproduce imposition of work, commodity and commodifications, etc., to the point in which what we generally call the economy, as a capitalist economy, seek to colonize society and even the non-human environment. I was just talking about before over lunch about, for example, the definition of sustainability for which has a meaning for scientists and indigenous people as something that tell us that we need to work within limited resources, and the meaning that sustainability has for economists, which are attuned with the idea of economic growth. And for economists, the concept of weak sustainability means that you can replace anything, all so-called nature services, with services produced by technology and by essentially produce things by capital. So instead you can replace trees by geoengineering big machine that sucks CO2s, right? That's the idea. Because why is that? Because trees don't produce profit, but big machines that produce profit help that. So we have through the reproduction of capital, we have this tendency to seek to subsume, to co-opt every other system, society, systems of social reproduction and of ecological reproduction. The reproduction of capital also goes through, and I don't have much time to talk about it, but it's an interesting thing, also the reproduction of capital command, which is that structure which has been theorized by some authors. I've been studying a forgotten author of Italian autonomist Marxism, which is Romano Alquati, who did a wonderful work on precisely the pyramid of command, of capitalist command, that is the command over the overall society, not as one boss at the top, but as an ongoing attempt by a mega levels of this pyramid to maintain everything that comes below functional to the system of capitalist reproduction, vis-a-vis struggles, vis-a-vis contradiction that emerges from the bottom. Okay? Now, one thing that we should be aware that is the capitalist reproduction is based on a particular measure of things. Okay? What do we mean by measure of things? By measure of things, I mean the way in which we measure, or who measure, processes of social production, of social cooperation. I call it the 5 W's and the 2 H. The 5 W's is who produces, when do we produce, where do we produce, what do we produce, why do we produce things, and the 2 H is how and how much. Now, this measure of things, if you think about any activity we do, we are kind of implicitly or explicitly, depending on our awareness, dealing with this, okay, with these questions. And in capitalist reproduction, the measure of things is done either by foremen or managers with particular priorities, or by impersonal market mechanisms. But is very seldom done by the producers or reproducers themselves. Okay, and this is actually captured very well by Marx in his definition of abstract labor. Marx, in the first chapter of Capital, talk about capitalist labor under the rule of capital as abstract labor, as human labor power expended without regard to the form of its expenditure. Now, if you think about what does it mean to expend labor power, our capacity to work, with no regard, with no consideration for the form, the ways in which we spend labor, means that those sensitive things that make us, that makes life, are unimportant. What is important is only whether that work is efficient, whether it's competitive, whether it creates a profit. Not whether we enjoy it, we don't enjoy it, no? And that's very important. So the measure of things is disconnected from the actual subjectivities carrying out the performativity of work, the life process. Okay, and one of the reasons why I mention this is because we always have to seek to remember how do we contrast the labor we perform within the commons from the labor that we perform within capitalist circles. So let me spend some time now talking about social reproduction. So I want to talk about social reproduction in terms of this sentence that somewhere Marx referred to, and that Foucault also highlight at one point in a different discourse, which is the production of human beings by means of human beings. And I'll try to connect it later to the feminist understanding of reproduction, and I think they are highly connected. So social reproduction is the sphere of social cooperation that has a material, bodily, cognitive, affective, so I'm bringing in all the senses, okay? Environmental and relational preoccupations with the production of human beings by means of human beings, okay? Everything is involved there. So we saw that reproduction means bringing forth, producing something back to the original place again, once more. That's the re of reproduction. And what does it mean then in relation to this production of human beings by means of human beings? It means that human beings are both the means and the ends of production. In social reproduction, we have this radical circularity. Human beings become both the end and the means of the reproductive process. And that means that we are beyond instrumental reasons that is used by capitalists, and it's the main basis of enlightenment, because instrumental reasons only look at means in order to have ends. But here we have both human beings are both means and ends. Producing human beings by means of human beings, the human beings are both means and ends. Okay, and we have to think about. So we have a radical circularity beyond the simple instrumental reason. Now, let me highlight here, when I'm talking about social reproduction, I'm also talking about the living in general, not just human beings, because this affective, emotional, etc., preoccupation with production of human beings by means of human beings happens within an ecosystem in which we recognize we are embedded in. Okay, so social reproduction, as the way I want to look at it, also involve a preoccupation with the living in general. And so going beyond instrumental reason and this radical circularity means implies that we need to have a radical design of social cooperation processes in such a way to favor a coincidence or at least a congruence between means and end, because human beings are on both sides, okay, in as a means and as an end, which opens the fact that we need processes and spaces of collective reflections on what are the socially just forms in which these human beings as means and ends socially cooperate. And here is to me, one of the main point of the commons and the role of also cognitive, affective commoning and dialogue and communication and languaging, which allow us precisely to design those forms. Very, very important. Now, to go back on some of the main, again, to give a bit of more texture on this social reproduction apart from general principles, I think that social reproduction recreate, and here is the feminist contribution that we started to learn really about or think about social reproduction thanks to the feminist contributions in the 70s, talking about the reproduction of labor power as the unspoken bit in Marx's work, and the big campaign of the wage for housework, recognizing that women hidden work in their households actually was fundamental to the recreation of the entire system by reproducing labor power in a way that was unwaged. But labor power here is labor power could be seen as a commodity, as it is within the hegemony of capital. But labor power is also a general capacity. Even within the commons, we have labor power. And we talked about power before, the labor power, the power of labor, meaning the power of doing collectively with others in this general sense, okay? And we develop, the last 2 days, we have developed our labor powers in that sense, that we might or we might not sell partially or fully in the capitalist market, but we have developed our capacity to do, to act, to think, to express emotions, etc. So I think the social reproduction as a production of human being by means of human beings, and therefore of the creation and recreation of our powers, is today both a layered and transversal social sphere across different sectors. It is layered in a multiplicities of practices at different scales. We reproduce, we have the problem of social reproduction is also inside the sites of capitalist production. If I am working, to make a classic example, if I am working in a factory and I am contesting my toilet breaks, I'm dealing with a question of social reproduction. If I have to deal with the emotions of work stress or family stress or life stress with a colleague, I'm dealing with social reproduction inside the capitalist reproduction system. Okay, so we don't have only a particular site in which there is social reproduction. Social reproduction is pretty much everywhere. Okay, it is concentrated in particular sites, for example, in communities, households, structures like hospitals, educations, but is also transversal. That is transversal to many other places, precisely because as human beings we are engaging everywhere. Now, this transversality is very important because it becomes a terrain, a potential terrain of social recomposition. If we were able to map out and connect these different sites, the focus on social reproduction can become a terrain in which we start to think about how we redesign and rework different way of doing it. Now, social reproduction happens also through the commons, and increasingly so. Think about the pandemic. The pandemic crisis. In the first wave of the pandemic crisis, there has been an explosion of initiatives of social reproduction, of production of human beings by means of human beings, to deal with the cracks of the system, to deal with the cracks of the system that were the result of years, for example, of cut in health services, widening income and wealth gap, etc. And here we have the commons coming in to take the role of to deal with the problems at hand. This happens in many contexts. To contrast the effect of social and ecological crisis, think about Hurricane Katrina in New Orleans in 2005. The first initiatives to deal with the problems of reproduction back then was precisely, self-organized activities by the communities that arrived far before the states, far before any other actors could come in. Or think about the social crisis like the Greek crisis at the beginning of 2009 with the explosion, crisis provoked by the cuts in health system and the closure of hospitals, cutting entitlements of public medicines, and then you have the explosion of self-organized clinics everywhere. Okay, that's the commons that intervene. So there is an immediate impulse for people to self-organize in a commons way to deal with these things. Or think about the many liberated spaces for participatory way to co-create art and culture. You have various examples of this. So the social reproduction is the commons are key in social reproduction in every different domains. Okay, let's not forget this. When we talk about social reproduction, we are talking about every single domain of life in which we create human beings by means of human beings that include culture, education, care, etc. Okay. All right, so this is my main map here of what. Now I want to shift, by keeping this in mind, I want to shift to the problem of going beyond the clash between capital and social reproduction, which give rise to the many crises that we are aware of. And my question is, what is social change? Radical social change. Social change, not just change in the shape of glasses or the type of technological change in which you have a new model of phones or etc. What is radical social change? I want to use here one sentence by Felix Guattari, who worked with Deleuze on his Anti-Oedipus and many other work, which I think help us to fix the thing. And he says that ultimately social change is predicated on reshaping the relationship that exists between subjectivity and its exteriority. That is the system that interacts with subjectivities as its context, whatever that exteriority is and whatever that subject is. So reshaping, so the question for us is, social change is somehow to reshape, recasting that relationship between subjectivities and exteriority through which at different scales in that social cooperation, at different scales, we produce and reproduce our lives. So the task is immense, okay? But that's what it's all about, okay? Reshaping that is made to cohere with new finalities away from capitalist reproduction, new ends, new sensibilities, new horizons, which essentially amount to the fact that social means a reorganization of social cooperation in some fundamental way. Okay? Reorganizing social cooperation. So the question is, how do we reorganize social cooperation? That means changing decision-making processes, increasing empowerment in terms of the collective process of determining the measure of things. Who decide what? The 5 W's and the 2 H's. Changing the interaction between the components of that system. And here, the commons are crucial for that. Now, I always like to put this, is my other draw I put, which I like to draw the commons in this way. This is the commons. This is my drawing for the commons. Okay?
That's a tweet.
Is a what?
That's a tweet.
This is what the commons is to me. And the commons is commons to me are not things, not common resources only. They are social systems. And why social system? Because they are complex. They are made of interacting parts, that is, defining relations. They relate to an environment. This is the environment. These two waves is the environment. So whenever you look at the commons, you always have to locate it in a particular context. Okay? And therefore, they're complex. They respond, they evolve, and they respond in different ways to the environment. And therefore, to the extent they are evolving, and to the extent there are actors, subjects within that environment, to go back to the to Felix Guattari's definition of social change, they are reshaping the relationship that exists between subjectivity and their exteriority. Okay? That's what the commons are subjects, social subjects, that reshape ongoing, to the extent they reflect, they engage with that environment. As we know, that circle here, that's the commons. The arrow here means that there is a thinking process, there is a direction here that is a set of finalities, of ends, that is collectively negotiated all the time. Okay? So the commons as a social system, it's potentially a powerful machine. It is comprised of elements like the commonwealth, the set of resources, or the community of commoners, the set of people with specific characteristics, and process of commoning, of doing in commons, including deeds, including cognitive commoning, reflecting. A reflection that employs the, or should employ at least, the another tweet, maybe? The Janus phase. The Janus phase is important because in the commons we need to have the Janus phase all the time. One phase looking the inside, self-reflecting on the processes inside the commons, where there are power hierarchies, what are the issues, what are the problems, how do we deal with it, and one phase looking outside, what is the context, what is the environment. In this environment we have capitalist systems, we have state systems, we have other common systems, and we have ecologies. Okay? And any commons has to relate in a way or in another to the other. So self-reflections there is crucial. Political and critical self-reflection is crucial because there is no commons that is not situated. But the important thing is that this commons here becomes a subject to deal with the environment in which it's located. Okay? And so can reshape that relationship, or at least can seek to strategically reshape that relationship. Okay? So what we have here inside the commons is mutuality and deep democracy in decision-making processes. Okay? Which favors alignment of means and ends. Deep democracy favors that realignment of means and ends that social reproduction requires. Okay? And by ongoing process also favor another important thing, that the processes of resubjectification, the changes that happens in us, in our perception, precisely because we are alerted to one another preoccupations and the baggage we carry in terms of heritage of power hierarchies, our locations in the world, etc., it brings us a reformulation of our own selections of things into the world. It reshape ourselves. So it's the machine is to reshape ourselves as a subjects as well. And another aspect which is fundamental is the question of the boundaries. Now, the boundaries are not given. The boundaries are shaped and reshaped by the way commoning process happens inside and vis-a-vis the outside. Now, there is a big literature discussion now on the necessity of having commons that have different forms of porous boundaries, not enclaves, porous boundaries, because those challenges ongoing evolution and ongoing adaptation in ways that allow us to progress into the world. You know, the porosity. There is an architect, a space theorist, Stavros Stavridis, is talk about thresholds, the commons as threshold spaces, not enclaves, threshold spaces, spaces which look both at the inside and outside, and which facilitate in certain ways to moment, the transition from one to another. And so the porosity of the boundaries need to be reflected on precisely to be involved in these mechanisms of evolution or co-evolution with the environment and alignment of finalities, but also allows us, the porosity allows us to construct scale, I think, which is that a big thing which I cannot talk about here, but it's one of the main issues, really, that I think we have to deal with, the question of scale. When we're talking about changing the world, we are talking about, do we want to go to a world in which each commons is a small island of social cooperation, or do we want to maintain larger waves and setting systems of cooperation at a more general level to build on the powers that we have developed. So it is a big question mark. Okay, now inside there, as I said, the engine of the commons is commoning, is the doing in common, which express many things. There are different levels that we can think in terms of commoning, different perspective, which I think they're all valid and it should be articulated. Different observation points. We can look at commoning to try to grasp it. At the level of the subjects, I'm using these four tags: the I, the it, the we, and the its. And I hope it will be clear. At the level of the subject, the I, commoning is the doing that draws on relationship grounded on expectation of reciprocal care and shared understanding of common resources. At the level of the circuit or system, the behavior of the system of the commons, the level of the it is the life activity through which commonwealth is reproduced, expanded, and come to serve as new basis of a new round of reproduction. At the level of we, of intersubjectivity, is human labor power expanded with regard, not without regard, but with regard to the form of expenditure. That is, with regard to the fact that human beings are both means and end. Okay, and that involves ongoing negotiations between subjects who play different roles in particular moments. And at the level of system vis-a-vis the many environment, it raises the question of commons right and legal rights, the question of the forms of social metabolism that we are engaging with. So I'm getting closer to the end. So in summary, the commons are the way I conceive the commons in terms of their role in social transformation is that they are cell forms, like cells do in our body. They are microsystem of social cooperation, that can potentially enact the reorganization of social cooperation as a whole. So we have to leave that unexplored for the moment. So commons are the sites of radical design of social cooperation process in ways that favor the coincidence between means and ends, their connections and the articulations. They are spaces of collective reflection on the socially just forms that would be necessary for a model of social cooperation in which all human beings are seen both as means and ends. They are systems in which people operate rebalancing and mutual adjustments, ongoing adjustment between means and end. And they are the organizational means of social reproduction. And essentially, here opens the question of power. It was mentioned today when he was saying, well, what is, if we don't take power, then what will we do with power? Well, change the world without taking power doesn't mean that we don't want to exercise power. There is a distinction between taking power and exercise power. The commons are, to take an expression from Marx, the creation, the production of another form of power. Another form of power that comes directly from the direct association of people. And here we arrive to the broad question of social transformation. And these are the elements of it. So we have the commons as the self form. We have the question, the self form in a continuous adjustment to the environment, the situated environment. We have the problematic of scale, which is the problematic of how to articulate the different commons, which is a strategic problematic, and we can talk about it. But there is the question of dealing with this form of social power, okay? The capitalist power. So commons in themselves are not enough, although well, let's put it in this other way. Traditional radical Marxist thinking thought in terms of the dichotomy between reform or revolution, if you remember the old debate. Marx made an important distinction, I think, between what he called social and political revolution, and I think we need both. But back in his days, he wrote this sentence: if we did not find concealed in society as it is the material conditions of production and the corresponding relations which are prerequisites for a classless society, then all attempt to explode it, to explode the class society, will be quixotic, from Don Quixote. No? Would be like going against windmills with a spade and a horse. No, would be fantasy. So that what he points at is that we need to find in the old world, in this world, the conditions, the forms of social cooperations which prefigure, in a sense, the new world, or a different way of doing things. And these things are the commons. So the growth of these forms of social cooperations, which are different from capital, radically different from capital, is a crucial, necessary prerequisite of social transformation. We cannot simply seize the power, right? The Winter Palace, or the site of what we think power is located, and today power is really located in many places, not just in one spot, but, you know, and then hope that through top-down processes, things just take a different process. Now, we need to develop a different forms of power understood as power of social power, of creating things in new ways. Expand that, and then push the constraint, or at the same time push the constraint. So here, to me, the metaphor of the what we call social revolution as the growth of this power within the old society, and political revolution understood as shifting the constraints of the powers that at the moment form this pyramid of power and try to hold everything down, come together. All right, and I see this in terms of the interplane between the evolution of the commons and the growing need for struggles, for social movements. And to me, the question is, how do we articulate it? And one way to articulate it is, for example, that is just one way, is the critical awareness within the commons of the political economic environment in which they are located. Okay, so and the connection among different commons to create movements or participate in existing movements, or to also influence existing social movements in ways to think about social transformations in this sense. Okay, so commons and social movement, commons and struggles go hand in hand, as social revolution and political revolution have to somehow coming together, as the creation of a new world in whatever setting has to go together with the shift in collective action and shifting the constraints in which we can then expand and create new forms of social powers. So that's about it. I hope it has made sense.